Hey everyone, welcome to Pit Stops to Podium, the Red Partners podcast, where we talk to execs who have competed and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tolson. I am the co-founder and CEO of Red Partners, and I'm delighted to have with me today Hiro Rodriguez for this episode of Pit Stops to Podium. Welcome, Hiro.
Thanks so much for having me, Brendan. It's an honor.
I don't know about an honor, but I'm honored to have you. Hiro, you and I got to know each other, I guess, probably over the last few years through Mike Arrieta, who was on the podcast last year. So it's fun to kind of see this come full circle. But Hiro currently serves as the CRO of Prefect. And so Hiro, for our audience, just to get to know who you are and who Prefect is, how do you give us that elevator pitch on Prefect and maybe a little bit about your background, because candidly you have a pretty unorthodox ride, which I think our audience would enjoy hearing about.
Certainly, it's been a lot of fun. So Prefect, what we do today, so Prefect is a data flow automation platform, and we help our users build, run, and monitor their data pipelines. And so what that means in very simple terms is these engineers, data scientists, they have code that needs to run. Inevitably, sometimes it breaks. And so what we do is we make sure that they can identify when that code was broken, and also very quickly identify and pinpoint what broke so that they can immediately address it. And so we work with customers from small to big. Our first ever customer was Cisco. We work with mom and pop shops. We have just released a case study with the Washington Nationals, which, by the way, wow, they started using Prefect in 2019, the year they won their World Series. So maybe it was coincidence.
I'm a Braves fan. We're actually the reigning champions. I just want to make sure that's noted in this recording.
Maybe they're Prefect customers. I just don't know it, because we also do have an open source component of our tool. And so there are a lot of people and customers who are companies that are using Prefect that are just on a free tier and then eventually come talk to us. So that's what we do at Prefect.
So that's Cisco's not a bad first customer, by the way. So if you're getting your company started, that's a good logo to have in terms of a referenceable client.
It certainly really woke us up to the opportunity that we had ahead of us. And today, from there, we've been very fortunate that a lot of other Fortune 500 companies have adopted Prefect. So it's been really exciting. We're just growing really, really fast. And it's been just an incredible ride. But it's only been a short part of that ride. So to answer your other question about what brought me to this point is, I started my very early sales career actually with Mike Arrieta and one of the other guests, Mike Cassetta, selling Cutco. So that is where I learned
this Cutco tree just keeps growing.
I tell you, we're everywhere. So that is where I learned just the basic fundamentals of selling. And so that's where I spent sort of my very early part of my career. But then I transitioned to my first part of my tech career in Salesforce. I moved to San Francisco, had this great opportunity to see how tech was being sold and live in sort of, the mecca of technology. And then I had this really unusual and just the greatest blessing opportunity to meet with both Mike Arrieta and Keith Krach, the chairman CEO of DocuSign. And so then I spent the next 4 or 5 years working alongside the two of them and helping build DocuSign into what is now a publicly traded company. I joined them when they were a Series C company, and it was just an absolute joy. And then from there, Keith Krach ended up going over to the federal government. So that is one of the reasons why I'm today based in Washington, D.C. I had a chance to serve as the chief business officer at the U.S. Department of State, and that was the honor of a lifetime to serve our country. And so now really had a chance to do that. But once it was time to find the new thing, I knew I needed to be back in tech. And here we are at Prefect, building this wonderful data company.
Well, that's an awesome story and one to be very proud of. And I think it's we'll dive in a little bit further as it relates to our big idea in light of your experience. And you mentioned Keith, so we'll get into that in just a second. And I'm also reminded the flag in the background. I remember when I first met you, I had no idea outside that being cool, but now I have a clear context as to what that's in reference to. But Hiro, before we get into our big idea, we do have a tradition here at Pit Stops to Podium, and it's to get to know our guest outside of work. So what are 3 fun facts that our audience should know about you outside of your unorthodox career journey?
Oh, I love this. So the first one I'll give you is, so I'm a concert pianist. So ever since I was a young boy, at two years old, my mom had me sitting on her lap and started lessons at 4, and was very blessed, had a chance to compete, the US Open a couple of times. So it was very, very serious part of my life. Now as a as a father, I sort of just get to play with my kids on the piano, and that's where I find the joy. So playing the piano is always a fun fact to throw out there.
There's a U.S. Open for that. That's fascinating. We don't have time for that, but I'm curious to know more about that when we grab a drink next time.
Oh my goodness. There are some serious piano players. I mean, families that their kids are homeschooled so that they can play the piano. So
sounds like this needs to be a new Netflix series.
Yeah, right. Thankfully, my mother really believed in being a balanced individual. So I had to mix in some football and sports with my piano too. So the second fun fact, which is always funny because, by day I'm in front of this computer screen on video calls and building tech. And so it's tech by day. And then funny enough, this Bay Area kid and lived in San Francisco, right outside of DC now. I'm a cowboy by night, I guess. I outside of work, if I'm not with my kids, or I literally grew up knowing nothing about horses. And here I am on the weekends trying to figure out what it means to actually be a person that's on a horse. Wow. So that's my hobby outside of tech and my family.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then the third one I'll give you, and it sort of is the inspiration behind this flag that you had mentioned here is I had this wonderful opportunity a couple of years ago where the Department of Defense selected 40 leaders from around the country. And I joined what's called the JCOC, the Joint Civilian Operations Conference. And what they did was they spent a week starting at the Pentagon. And then you go every single day to a new base. So we went to Fort Carson, Colorado. We went to Las Vegas for the Nellis Air Force Base. We went to Coronado and San Diego to watch the SEALs. And every day I had a chance to meet a different military branch and meet the men and women who serve and protect our country. And that was a unique experience. And I also share that because it was really a catalyst to what ultimately drove me to serve our country at the Department of State, and partially were a big part of, my patriotism. And though I have an American flag behind me, I'm just so darn proud of how we just live in this great free country, and JCOC really gave that blessing to me.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about you and the piano side and the hobby. I don't know if that's a post-COVID hobby with the horse riding, but that's always fun to hear what people pick up, and then just your experience, serving our country. So thank you for that. Well, here, let's transition to the big idea. And you talked a little bit about it in your career, as how people influence the trajectory of your career. And so I think the big idea for us today, let's park on this concept of really don't do it alone, and how the power of mentorship and how important that is as it relates to your trajectory, not only from a professional standpoint, but what it means from a relational side. And so let's start, as we think through how to break this down, let's unpack a little bit more about your experience being mentored, and specifically with Keith at DocuSign. So let's share a little bit more in terms of that, what that was like for you and some of the takeaways that you received from that.
Absolutely. I feel very blessed that I've had a lot of mentors, and I would include someone as, like my parents is that, but one of them that was certainly influential from a business perspective is Keith Kroc, the former chairman CEO of DocuSign. And I was as his chief of staff for many years. And, one of the things I'll never forget, was when one day Keith and I were walking in his garden, and I said, Keith, who's the greatest leader that you can think of? And I thought he was going to say to me, John Chambers, the former and revered CEO of Cisco, who was Keith's true mentor. He met him once a month when he was building Ariba. And he goes, Hiro, it's not one person. See, the thing is, you have to have what's called a hybrid leadership matrix. You want to figure out all the different characteristics that are important to you. So whether it's courage, fidelity to principle, kindness, public speaking, strategic thinking. And then on the different axis, you put all the different leaders that have and sort of carry those characteristics. And so you might say, okay, my father's really patient. I look up to him for that. Keith is very strategic when it comes to building businesses. Okay, I'm going to look him up to that. And so what that really inspired me to do is to seek a lot of mentors, but not just mentors that I would, call once a month and ask, hey, can you give me some advice about X, Y, and Z? But to just sort of build this, whole plethora of folks that I truly call friends first. And then they were ultimately the ones that drove a lot of the wisdom that when I was sort of facing a moment, I tried to think about, okay, who might have a good perspective on this one? So Keith in a lot of ways really inspired that, but mentorship is such a big part of what got me to where I am today.
Yeah, I like that concept of it's not an individual, it's multiple people. And we all have like, it just reminds me, we all have strengths. And so it's understanding like, what are the things you aspire to be? And based off of that characteristic, you're kind of matching that competency with that person and building that relationship.
What's funny, Brendan, too, is that sometimes you find things that are where someone might not be very good at. Matter of fact, you might say, actually, that person is someone I don't want to follow. Right. Yeah. And that's just as valuable too, because you go, okay, that's the kind of leader I'm not going to be one day when I'm in that position, for example. So
I think it's probably also freeing for the mentor, knowing that like the weight of expectations, if someone's coming to me and saying, I want you to serve all these different functions for me, as opposed to like, hey, I know you're really great at this, and so I'd love to just focus on that area. I think that allows a lot of freedom and comfort to really understand what the expectations are from that mentor-mentee relationship.
You're so right, Brendan. I mean, nobody out there in this world knows everything about everything. It's the likelihood that that you're going to find somebody that can answer every one of your questions when you face a fork in the road it's zero. And so when you have all these different people that you can look up to, and that's what it's all about. And by the way, sometimes it's people that you don't ever, personally know. It might be someone that you've read about or you have seen in the news, and you go, man, I really have heard a lot about their leadership style. That's something I look up to. Steve Jobs is someone, right? His ability to just be innovative. My goodness, I would love that thinking. But from what I've read is, maybe his leadership style was a little bit more abrasive than I might choose to live. And so it doesn't always have to be necessarily somebody that you personally know, although that's oftentimes a good one. But sometimes the public folks are just as valuable too.
That's great. And so I think, naturally, as you are being mentored by someone, and you mentioned there's multiple people, but I know Keith has been instrumental to you. There's probably a natural desire to want to pay that forward. And so how, in light of what you've experienced and how that's benefited you professionally and personally, what are you doing now as it relates to giving back on that paradigm?
Funny enough, Brendan, I had this conversation about a week ago with one of our salespeople here at Prefect, who's getting ready to be promoted. At Prefect, we firmly believe about giving people a chance to get promoted from within. It's oftentimes where we'll look. And one of the questions he asked is, hey, Hiro, as I get ready for this next role in my life as a sales leader, I'm really trying to find some mentors. He goes, do you have any suggestions? And so he goes, would you be okay being a mentor? And I look at him and I go, man, I hope I'm on your list. You got it. You can count on me being a mentor. One of the pieces of advice I gave him was that it's not about making sure that, you have this transactional once a month check-in. Now I do have some folks that I do have the blessed opportunity where they do want to hear what my opinion and advice. And we do have scheduled calls, and I love that. And it's been great. And to see them flourish in their career. Matter of fact, one of them actually just became a chief of staff. So we had a lot to talk about. So as much as I can, lending my experience to somebody is certainly what it's all about, time willing, but also, when it's other CEOs, CROs that are building their company, trying to go international and saying, hey, what do you think about this? I am all for that. What I only ask is that, hey, sometimes it's tough to stick to this once a month or once a quarter schedule. Just if you have a question, feel free to ping me. I would love to help out. And that's one of the things that's really been transformative, so that it's not just this one way, once a month I have to prepare and they have to come up with questions, but it's very organic. And that is what's made these mentorships today that I have the blessing to be a mentor on really blossom and very meaningful.
Yeah, I think it's a good segue too into, we talk about what makes a characteristic of a good mentee. And you talked a little bit about earlier, the friends first, mentorship second. You've already started to unpack that a little bit, but let's talk about it a little bit further in terms of what should the expectations be going into these type of, because at the end of the day, these are relationships. Mm-hmm. So what should the expectations be on both sides in your mind? Who's driving that? And how do you kind of agree upon this? You're talking about even cadence. That's just an interesting topic of what the expectations should be.
Absolutely. And I love that, right? I think I'm going to come out with a blog that's called Friends First, Mentorship Second. It really is all about, having to build this just natural relationship. And then when the time is needed, then you have somebody, a friend that you can call on and ask for advice. I will say though, at the end of the day, one of the things that's really important to me as a mentor is that I truly believe the common denominator behind every single mentee is that they're coachable. If someone's willing to say, hey, I have room for improvement, hey man, any mentor would love to take them on. But it's when somebody thinks that they know everything, well, then they don't need mentorship apparently. But I will also add that being able to have somebody you can call on is just the greatest. So I'll give you an example. When I was in tech and I was contemplating whether or not to join the State Department, other than JCSC being really inspirational, at the time I said, man, who can I call? And I ended up calling two of these very well-established executive. One's an executive and one is former, very high-ranking military general. And I said, hey, both of you have served in the government and in the private sector. I'm contemplating going into the public sector. Do you mind if I just pick your brain? It was funny because the general goes, well, here, I'm obviously going to tell you to go serve your country, but yes, let's have a conversation. But it was helpful because at the time they were I knew, okay, I can call on somebody that would have a very specific perspective on this very unique moment in my career. And I was able to do that because, I built relationships, a friendship with them. And so I really would my advice to anybody who's out there looking for a mentor is certainly, be very intentional about it, but make sure that it's not a transactional relationship, that you really are just building a relationship first. And then ultimately when the time comes, you have you can ask them when it makes sense. And as much as you can, it's sometimes hard, is see if you can make it a two-way street. How can I help you? Most of the time the mentor is going to go, hey, just helping you is enough for me. But just throwing it out there proves to them that this is not just I take and you give kind of relationship. And I think that's really important when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. When you talk about coachability, I think about humility. And then there's also the component, like there is, I think to your point, there's an authenticity when you talk about intentionality of like, what is your true desire of this? And is it for the relationship and building a friendship, or is it to get something from somebody? Yeah. And that's a very different dynamic. But it sounds like there's also an aspect of being, like you mentioned with that general example, when you're deciding government or tech, like you also have to be proactive and make the ask. Like, meaning the mentor is not going to likely solicit, hey, do you want to be a mentee of mine? So like, what would you encourage our audience as it relates to that in terms of how and when to make the ask?
Absolutely. It's this idea of being intentional about it. You have to sort of make the decision that, hey, I'm not going to be afraid, or I have enough humility to know that I don't know everything, and I'm going to be okay with that. And then I think that carries a lot of weight when someone comes up to you and goes, hey, I'm really need some help on this question. I don't know enough about it. I tell you, that carries itself so highly, in my eyes, when somebody asks to, for mentorship. So, I think that humility is going to be key. The intentionality of saying, hey, I'm going to try to seek somebody that might have that answer. And what's so great is that people are most of the time willing to help out. So, don't be afraid to ask, as you said. That's really the key piece here.
Yeah, I think there's also this paradigm, or paradox rather, of a weakness can be viewed as a strength. And to what you're just explaining is if you are coachable and you're humble, people gravitate to that.
Right. So, when I was at the State Department, I was joining into a world that I knew very little about. And there are foreign service officers over there and diplomats that have made a career out of this. And while I might have come in, and Keith and I came into this role that we were very blessed to do, the only way that you survive in this major bureaucracy is you have to be okay with understanding, hey, how do I get things done around here? You got to shake up feathers a little bit, but not being afraid to ask and really solicit advice from every single rank, from the top and, in the White House, all the way down to sort of the very early, sort of earlier in the career diplomats, if you will. Like, man, asking everybody some questions and advice, that's another way that somebody could be a mentee, no matter how highly ranked you are in your role or at your company. Being a mentee is universal and should be timeless.
I love that as a final thought. It's not exclusive. It's really available to everybody, regardless of what stage you're at. And it's funny, when I was actually on somebody else's podcast, and they were asking me about like those inflection points from my career. And it wasn't the role, it was the people that I was a part of. And like what I immediately thought of was individuals. And I think that's probably pretty consistent with you. It's just that's what you think about as it relates to what's helped you and propelled you as the people that you surround yourself with and those that you're learning from. So Hiro, thank you for sharing your experience and the value of mentorship, both as a recipient and as a giver, I guess is the right word there. But Hiro, as we wrap up, what are some practical ways that our audience can engage with you or with Prefect for that matter?
Absolutely. So, we're always looking for great coachable individuals at Prefect. So if you're interested in learning, for us, we definitely have a culture of not just this idea of mentorship, but learning. Learning is literally one of our core values, so much so that we actually give our employees $1,000 a year to dedicate just to learning. And so whether it's a formal mentorship kind of thing or just reading a book. So here at Prefect, if you're interested, you can always come check us out. We're hiring in a big way. We're scaling up at a fast rate right now. So check us out there. And then also on LinkedIn, I'd love to hear from folks and, drop a little message. I'd love to connect and support anybody that I possibly can.
All right, Hiro, I really appreciate you stopping by. Thanks for sharing your experience. And if those are folks who are looking for mentorship and at a great company, that sounds like we got a good fit here. So we'll be in touch. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Brendan.